Hey guys, what is going on? I'm back in the man cave and there is so much to talk about. A new Wallabies coach and, of course, round 12 of Super Rugby to preview. Let's jump straight into it. This guy here to the side of me, Les Kiss, the Queensland Reds coach, will soon be the Wallabies national coach. Now, there's been a little bit of a rejig to the plans. You might recall that Schmidt, the current Wallabies coach, he was going to tackle the British and Irish Lions this year. Huge tour, probably the biggest event in world rugby in 2025. He was then going to see the Wallabies through the Rugby Championship, and then he was going to drop deuces. He was going to be out. That is no longer the case. He is actually going to stay on for the end-of-year tour, and he's going to oversee the transition into the next coaching regime throughout the first half of next year. So quite an extension here from Joe Schmidt, considering that he was ready to bounce a few months from now. And it's so interesting that this guy who was so courted, sought after as a coach, just doesn't really seem to want to stick around for the long run. Now, Joe Schmidt has a family member, an immediate family member with special needs. So you will never hear a word of criticism from me. His family is his priority, and I respect the hell out of that. There's no amount of money, there's no amount of prestige that's going to change that. I just think it's interesting. Joe Schmidt probably could have been the All Blacks coach. I mean, truly, his international experience and success with Ireland might have just seen him leapfrog Razor Robertson if it came down to a head-to-head duel, which it didn't. Now, of course, Schmidt came into the All Blacks fold in 2023, really helped shore up the team, got them all the way to a Rugby World Cup final against the Springboks. Jason Ryan helped a lot too, but Schmidt was instrumental in that. Then he's been handpicked for the Wallabies. I think the Wallabies always knew he was only going to make it through to the Lions at a minimum. I think they knew he wasn't the guy to go all the way through to Rugby World Cup 2027, and that's okay, because they just needed an experienced hand for this huge Lions tour. So what do we think of Les Kiss? Well, he's a good coach at Super Rugby level. There are a few stats that really endear him to me. One is that the Reds are leading the tackle completion rate. It's up there in the 90s. They're number one in the competition. So gritty defense has been a hallmark of the Reds under this bloke. He has primarily handled defensive portfolios in the past. In fact, Joe Schmidt and he teamed up for the Irish national team. I believe they have 3 Six Nations trophies together. That's a hell of a record. So we know that these guys can work together. They can gel. You know that Schmidt wants his mate to transition smoothly into the role. Is there enough time for him to build the Wallabies up into a World Cup winning team at home? Because 2027 is right around the corner, that Aussie World Cup. Here's how I feel about it. You can have Mickey Mouse coaching the Wallabies team. You can have Les Kiss. You can have Joe Schmidt. It doesn't really matter until these Aussie boys get some consistency into their game. Yes, the Aussie sides are much improved in Super Rugby this year. There are 2 reasons for that. One is the looming specter of the British and Irish Lions. They are coming down under. They are going to be hungry. They are going to be tougher than hell. The Wallabies, forwards in particular, have lifted their game this year. There's a carrot on the end of the string. The other thing is a simple mathematical formula. 5 Super Rugby teams went into 4. And so the talent pool is less diluted. But can the Wallabies come together and be that consistent international team that they have been threatening to be for decades now, and yet they just never seem to do it? I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced, because I'm still looking at teams like the Waratahs, who are good enough to beat the number 1 ranked team, the Chiefs, but they're also dropping a game to Moana Pacifica. They're also getting routed 57 points to 10 against the Hurricanes. I'm looking at the Brumbies. You feel like these guys are good enough to win it all, and yet they're fabulous one week, dreadful the next. They got absolutely obliterated by the Hurricanes at home. The Aussies are not consistent, and I am not seeing that translating into a consistent Wallabies team anytime soon. Yes, there is a disconnect between Super Rugby and the international level. We've seen that many times over. But for me, I need more evidence that these Aussie players can back it up week in, week out, deliver, foot on the throat, consistent. I'm not seeing that yet at the super level with any of the Aussie teams. And therefore, I don't have faith that they can do that as players when they pull on a gold jersey. Can the Wallabies beat the All Blacks this year? Yeah, they definitely can on form. I think that the Aussie players are looking great. Tizano has been fantastic at 7. Guys like Fraser McWright, Harry Wilson when he was fit are great. Angus Bell is awesome. The forward pack is looking really good. You got Tom Wright at the back. You got no shortage of young 10s coming through. Laniki Tau, Joseph Suali'i, X Factor. But can they beat the All Blacks twice? I'm not sure about that. I think they're good for one win over the All Blacks this year. They're going to need more than one win to win back the Bledisloe Cup. So I'm wishing Les Kiss all the best, truly. He's going to go through all the way to 2028. Although, let's be honest, if there's a disastrous Rugby World Cup campaign, that may not be the case. But for now, the Aussies are looking longer term with him. I think he's as good as any option. I was a bit of a Stephen Larkham guy. I think he's a brilliant mastermind. But Les Kiss, he's going to get his chance. He's going to start next year after one more season with the Reds. Let's hope that doesn't distract him, take his eye off the prize. I'm really wishing him the best. I want the Wallabies to be strong, even just from a selfish perspective for the All Blacks. We'll see. Let's move on to Super Rugby, guys. Super Rugby Round 12. Can you believe it? We got the Blues versus the Force. Blues need a win here, man. Drua Reds. That one seems a little predictable to me. And then, a huge one is the Hurricanes versus the Chiefs, because the Hurricanes are now knocking on the door of that top 6 finish. There's still a few weeks to go. They're in the mix right now. They're in the top 6, but can they maintain that? Well, this game's going to be pretty pivotal. And, of course, a local derby. Speaking of Wallabies spots, Brumbies and Waratahs, man, they're duking it out for spots to take on the Lions. Then we've got Highlanders versus Moana Pacifica. Again, a super important fixture, that one, because even though these guys are near the bottom of the table, one of them could pop up into the top 6. So let's briefly take a look at the teams here. We're going to start with the Blues. Well, the most important thing is Beauden Barrett is fit. He is firing at 10. Little bit of a merry-go-round with the halfbacks, though. Funaki gets a start this week. No Finlay Christie. Papali'i and Satutu really have warmed to their work. Good to see Ricky Riccatelli back at hooker. And Perifetta at 15, that's pretty nice. The dual playmaker combo, Barrett and Perifetta, we've been crying out for that. I think that could be pretty dangerous on attack. But let's take a look at their opponents here. The Force, well, Ben Donaldson equally has been a good number 10 this year. You feel that he might be back in the Wallabies jersey. Lolosio might have something to say about that. And another bloke who's running around for the Waratahs might even have something to say about that. But Nick White is on the bench. They're certainly going to need his experience. And, the name that immediately jumped out, number 15, Kurtley Beale. Speaking of experience, this bloke has so many Wallabies caps. He's a little bit longer in the tooth now, but this guy's still got class. Just feel like he might be a little bit exposed. He hasn't been used to this kind of pace, this Super Rugby pace. He hasn't had a lot of minutes, right? So it's actually, even for guys experienced as him, it's a big ask to be kind of thrown in there in the deep end. But look, as is always the case, it's going to come down to that battle of the breakdown. The Blues have been very inconsistent at the breakdown, and they're going up against Carlo Tizano at 7, who I think is the best performing 7 in the Australian ranks this year. Tough one to pick. What do you guys think? Probably leaning towards the Blues for that one, given the Eden Park advantage. Let's take a look at the Fijian Drua, who are going to be taking on the Reds. I'm just going to point out one name here, and that is Ravula at 15. This guy can play 10. He can play 15. Lacking consistency at 10, this team is. Now, I know it's unfair to always compare them to Moana Pacifica. Of course, they get lumped in together because of that Pacific Islands factor. But it's hard not to compare those two teams when you look at Patrick Pellegrini from Moana Pacifica, the consistency, the poise that he has brought at number 10. This team doesn't have that. And that's one of the biggest differences. It's not just Adi Savea at 7 for Moana Pacifica. It's that game control. Nothing against Valentini at 10, but you just feel like these blokes never quite settled on that 9-10 combo in the way that a Moana Pacifica has. And that could cruel them in this game. But let's take a look at the Reds. Their opponents, of course, Les Kiss that we just talked about to start off the show this week. The next Wallabies coach, well, he's going to be coaching this lot. And what jumps out to me is Jock Campbell, who made a good return at 15. Tate McDermott, of course, at 9. He is the captain, probably the best halfback running around Australia currently. Paisami, I mean, real firepower there in the back line. Again, maybe a little inconsistency with 10. You know, some people say that Tom Liner, who can play there, he's at 22 this week. Well, could he be the starting 10? Perhaps. They're chopping and changing the team a lot. Even looking at the front row, you've got 2 former All Blacks who could be starting. Jeffrey Tumunga-Allen, Alex Hodgman, they're on the bench. They're really mixing it up a lot. They're rotating through their stock. The Reds, I think that won't hurt them this week, but ultimately they're going to need to really nail down that first 15 as we get to the pointy end of the season. And there's still a few question marks about who should be starting. There are question marks, even this deep, as well as they've performed. It's not crystal clear. I think the Reds will win that one. That's what I think. All right, the Hurricanes. Well, Billy Proctor was absolutely sensational last week. I mean, in one performance, he thrust himself back into All Black contention. This guy's distribution, pace, and vision makes him a real candidate to knock Rieko Ioane out of midfield and be the starting 13 for the All Blacks. You might think that sounds crazy. I think that's a very real possibility. If not this year, then next year. Ruben Love at 10. I'm excited to see that. You know, I'm a big fan of this guy. Get him in there closer to the action. He's a 15, but he can play 10 well. And he lit it up last week against the Brumbies. He was sensational. The distribution, the stepping. Excellent. Now, there are a couple of question marks around his defense. He's not the biggest guy in the world. But I actually tend to think it's better to put your playmaker closer to the action if the defense is a little bit of a frailty. I think it's better for them to be in midfield where it can be covered a little more by a sweeper, right? Or by the midfielders outside them. I actually think the notion of, you know, hiding a number 10 at fullback, shunting them out into the backfield so they can defend there, I think that's a myth. I think you can actually really get exposed when you're the last line of defense. And again, I think Ruben Love is a solid, willing defender. I merely point that out because he isn't the biggest guy running around. But plenty of size elsewhere. Lakai's been great at 8. Karifi, Yossi earning his 50th Hurricanes cap. Good mobility and size there in the loose forwards. Asafo Amua, just brilliant at hooker. Yeah, and pretty settled, you know, in the wing position there with Punavais having a great season at 14. Otherwise, a little bit of rotating there, you know, with Calum Harkin coming in. A little bit of rotating there in the back 3. But also Kini Naholo. I mean, he just ate up the Brumbies like it was Magic Spoon cereal last week. I don't know why I'm plugging them. I'm not even sponsored by them. I do eat that cereal, though. So, yeah, I'm liking the look of that team. Liking the look of that team very much. But the Chiefs, well, there's no Damian McKenzie. His hand is not okay. You know, he missed the game last week with that hand injury. So Jacob's in there. Fortunately, their strategy of playing Jacob and giving him minutes this season is kind of paying dividends now, because with McKenzie out of the mix, Jacob's not coming in cold. He's actually warmed up and ready to go. Ratama's warming up to his work, asserting himself as definitely the second best halfback in New Zealand. And then you've seen the return of Tupovai, Samapeni Finau. You saw those guys coming off the bench initially as they return to action. Now they're bona fide starters. You've seen Josh Lord also come back into the mid row. So some pretty, you know, formidable All Black names out there. Samasoni Takiahau is on the bench. He's looked promising, but hasn't really convinced fully enough to start. And that's a little bit of a worry, coming off a long-term injury and just hasn't 100% found his feet. But, boy, it's hard to go against the Chiefs, even with McKenzie missing, I think. Okay, let's take a look at the Brumbies here. Valetini, Hooper, Lonergan, Tom Wright. I mean, I say it every week. Just very consistent. Probably one of the most consistent Aussie teams. Not much to say here. You know, I've got to give this team an A-, to be honest with you. And then I look at the Tars. Again, Angus Bell, one of the best line breakers in the competition. I'm looking at Rob Leota. I'm looking at Langy Gleeson. Real starch in the pack. These guys are starting to rack up a lot of minutes together. The consistency is there. Lawson Crichton at 10. He's putting his hand up for a Wallabies jersey. He's played pretty well. I'm not sure about this one, guys. This is a bit of a 50-50 one. I think probably the Brumbies are due to bounce back. They're a good team. They got humiliated by the Canes last week. I'm not sure that's going to happen 2 weeks in a row. And finally, the Highlanders. Yes, Cameron Miller's in there at 10. That always makes me feel more confident. Fabian Holland, Ethan de Groot. With all that said, it's just hard to pick these guys to win, isn't it? And I love Tavatanawai. Thomas Umanga Jensen's been playing well. JRK at 15, really starting to cut it up. Let's take a look at the opponents. Man, you just kind of think that Moana Pacifica is going to do it again. With Miracle Faialangi and Artie Savia out there, I think they're going to boss the breakdown. I even think these guys are good enough to control the set piece. Tom Savage at 4 has been absolutely brilliant. He's been the glue holding this team together. You look at the back line, William Havili out there. That's good to see. I do wonder why Patrick Pellegrini's on the bench again, because I do not rate him behind Jackson, Garden, Bishop. Sure, it's nice to have Pellegrini come on and steer the team home, but they need to make sure that they're scoring plenty of points in the first 60 minutes. I'm not sure that they want to save this one till the very end to rescue it, even though they are a great second-half team. Let's go with Moana Pacifica to continue the fairy tale and push for that spot in the top 6. All right, guys, I'm very excited to break down this round with you. Comment below with your picks, and I'll be back for another one real soon. Gonna love you and leave you. Take it easy, guys. Bye for now.